It's strange how silence can feel louder than screaming. The day she left, she didn't slam the door. No shouting, no theatrics. Just the faint sound of her keys being set on the kitchen counter and the slow, deliberate click of the lock behind. Her. I stood there in the hallway, barefoot on cold hardwood, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, like everything else between us. And yet, I still whispered, "I'm sorry," to the emptiness she left behind. That's what I always did apologize. For forgetting to text her back while I was in meetings. For needing a day to myself. For flinching when she raised her voice. For not being enough, somehow. For existing the wrong way. For years, I thought love was supposed to hurt a little. Told myself the friction meant depth, that her moods were the weight of a passionate soul, and that my job was to carry some of that burden for her. That if I were patient enough, understanding enough, forgiving enough, she'd finally feel safe enough to love me gently. But it never came. Instead, it was me who bent further each time. Me who folded, made excuses, counted her trauma like scars. That justified every cut she gave me. She'd cry after hurting me real tears, and I'd end up holding her while she sobbed over my shoulder, whispering how broken she was. And somehow, I'd end up being the one who said sorry. "I know I'm too much," she'd whisper. "You should just leave. You deserve better." But the way she said, it made me feel like leaving would prove her right. Like staying and loving her was the only way to prove. I wasn't like the others who had failed her before Dot, so I stayed. Even when the air in our home turned thick and brittle. Even when walking through the front door felt like bracing for a storm. Even when I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. I remember one night we were out to dinner. One of those rare nights she seemed radiant and light, laughing like she used to when we first met. I said something, a harmless joke, something I can't even recall now. But her smile vanished. Her eyes turned to glass. And by the time we got home, she'd stopped speaking to me altogether. I spent 3 days apologizing for a sentence I couldn't remember saying. 3 days without eye contact. 3 nights lying in bed beside her, feeling her body rigid and silent, while my chest felt like it was being crushed by a slow, invisible weight. Dot. And when she finally turned to me, mascara streaked and voice trembling, she told me how I triggered her deepest wounds. That I'd been careless, that I'd reopened things she was barely surviving. I cried that night, not because I was angry, but because I believed her. I believed I'd hurt her, and she hugged me, finally, and said, "Thank you for seeing me." There was a strange relief in her forgiveness, like I'd finally passed a test I didn't know I was taking. But that test never ended. I started therapy, at her request. She said I needed to explore the ways I'd learned to invalidate people, that I was too logical, too detached, too ... emotionally numb. She even picked the therapist, Dr. Leah Marks. Warm eyes, soothing voice, sharp mind. I started seeing her weekly, and at first I talked about my childhood, my communication habits, my fears of abandonment. But over time, I noticed something strange. Dr. Marks kept asking me the same kinds of questions. Quiet, pointed things like, "And when she criticizes you, how does your body respond?" Or, "Why do you feel the need to apologize so quickly?" At first, I thought she was just helping me process. But then, ... I saw it in her eyes. That hesitation. That flicker of something unspoken when I described my relationship. It wasn't pity. It was concern. One Tuesday afternoon, toward the end of a session, I mentioned offhandedly how my girlfriend kept a journal. A private one, she used to say. It was how she managed her triggers, how she kept herself grounded. I never touched it. I respected her boundaries. But then Dr. Marks leaned forward slightly, almost imperceptibly, and asked, "Have you ever read it?" I froze. No, I said too quickly. She nodded. Would you, if you found it? I didn't answer, because the truth is, I had found it. A few days earlier, wedged beneath the couch cushions, half lodged like it had been dropped in a rush. I hadn't opened it, not out of virtue, but fear. I didn't want to see what I thought would be in there. A catalog of my failures. The way she painted me when she cried to friends. The words she used when she told me I made her feel unsafe. Didn't want to face my reflection through her eyes. But something in Dr. Mark's voice that day stayed with me, and that night, after pacing the apartment for hours with a gut full of dread, I sat down, opened that little leather-bound journal. And what I read made my skin crawl. The pages were soft at the edges, warped slightly from her fingertips. Some entries were written in sharp, slanted cursive, others in a rushed scrawl that looked almost frantic. There were no dates, no structure, just emotion poured out like blood on paper. I thought I'd find grief, confusion, maybe pain, but what I found was calculation. It started subtly. She described arguments we'd had, but not the way I remembered them. In her words, she orchestrated them. She wrote about how she would pull back emotionally to see if he notices, or create silence. Until he breaks. She even recorded how long it would take before I apologized, like she was tracking results in a lab. He said sorry in under 4 hours this time. Good. He still feels guilty. I couldn't breathe. I flipped to another page, begging for context, for irony, for some kind of explanation that would make this all make sense. Instead, I found more. I told him I had a nightmare about him leaving me. He got up in the middle of the night and held me for an hour. That fear keeps him close. Use it sparingly. I stood up, shaking. My skin felt wrong, too tight, like my body was trying to crawl out of itself. It didn't stop there. There were lines about how she tested me. Withheld affection. Twisted my words during vulnerable moments to see if I'd beg for reassurance. She described it like an art form. Emotional disorientation was the term she used. Remember that word because I Googled it after I stopped crying. It's real. It's what people use in interrogations. Psychological warfare. Make someone question their own memory, their instincts, their identity. I read on. The worst entry wasn't the cruelest, it was the calmest. His therapist might be catching on. I have to be careful now. If he starts seeing things clearly, I'll lose control of the frame. But he still doubts himself. He's still apologizing. That means I'm still winning. I dropped the journal. For a full minute, I just stared at it lying there on the coffee table, like it might move. Like it might lunge at me with its twisted little truths and wrap around my throat again. I wasn't angry. Not at first. I was numb. Cold. Like someone had pulled the rug out from under my entire sense of reality, and I was still in midair, waiting to hit the ground. It wasn't just about her. It was about me, the man I had become under her shadow. I had twisted myself into someone unrecognizable to stay in love with someone who wasn't real. A performance, a mask, a mind game, and I had loved her with everything. The pain didn't come until later, when I started remembering things with new eyes. The dinner where she went silent wasn't about what I said. It was a planned withdrawal to trigger my panic. The tears she shed weren't sorrow. They were currency. Emotional. Manipulation, dressed in the costume of vulnerability. She didn't need healing. She needed control. I stayed up all night rereading parts of the journal, piecing together a version of my life that I hadn't realized I'd lived. Every doubt I'd buried, every instinct I'd silenced, every moment I'd felt off but pushed. Through Out of Love validated, I felt sick. The next morning, I took the journal with me to therapy. I didn't say anything when I walked into Dr. Mark's office. Just handed it to her, sat down and waited. She flipped through it slowly. Page after page. Her face didn't change much, but her eyes did. A slight narrowing. A wince she tried to mask. When she closed the journal and looked at me, her voice was soft, steady, but I could hear it, the shift. How long have you been apologizing for things you didn't do? I couldn't answer, not because I didn't know, but because the truth was, I'd been doing it for years, long before her. But she'd taken that broken part of me and wrapped it in chains. And I let her. Dr. Marks asked if I wanted to confront her. I said no, because something had cracked inside me, but not in the way it used to. This time, the crack let in light, and I wasn't going to scream or fight or burn the house down. I was going to get quiet. Still, I was going to take back control. Not just of the relationship, but of me. And to do that, I had to see what else she was hiding. You don't just wake up one day and stop doubting yourself. Even with the journal in my hands cold, undeniable proof of her manipulations, there was still a part of me whispering, maybe you deserved it. Maybe she was just hurt. Maybe if you'd been stronger, more attentive, less distant, she wouldn't have needed to play games. That's how deep it ran. Shame doesn't disappear when you uncover the truth. It fights back. It adapts. It claws at your throat and tries to convince you that being mistreated was a reflection of your worth, not of her cruelty. But something had shifted. I started seeing with new eyes. Little things. Memories I used to brush aside, like the first time she cried in front of my friends and made me out to be insensitive. We'd been dating only a few months, and she told a story about us that wasn't true, not quite. She said I had forgotten her birthday. In reality, I had planned an entire evening for her, but the gift I ordered arrived late. I remember laughing awkwardly, trying to correct the story, but she teared up and said, "It's okay. He forgets things when he's stressed." Everyone turned to me, frowning. That moment stuck with me for days. I apologized to her after that night. She hugged me, whispered how sweet it was that I cared so much. That was her way to twist the frame just enough to place herself in the victim's seat, then wrap herself in my guilt like a weighted blanket. There were so many others. At the time, I called her from work to let her know I'd be late, and she didn't answer. I came home to silence. No dinner, no lights. Just her curled on the couch, eyes puffy, saying she had a panic attack because she thought I was with someone else. I spent that entire night reassuring her. We never talked about the fact that she didn't return my calls because she wanted me to panic too, to come home guilty, to collapse into the role she had carved out for me. And I played it every time. But now, every memory carried new weight. Not just pain. Clarity. Dr. Marks gave me a few tools, questions to ask myself when memories surfaced. Whose voice do you hear in your head when you feel ashamed? Whose needs were you ignoring when you rushed to fix things? Who actually benefited from your guilt? The answers kept pointing to the same place. Still, I didn't say anything to her. I didn't bring up the journal. I didn't accuse. I became quiet. Observant. She noticed. Of course she did. People like her can smell a shift in power like wolves scent blood. Is everything okay with you? She asked one evening after I'd been particularly distant. Yeah, I said. Just thinking a lot lately. She cocked her head, watching me carefully. About us? I nodded. She leaned closer, her voice softening into that familiar wounded lilt. Are you pulling away from me? There it was, the setup. The invitation to admit guilt, to step back into the role of the flawed partner, trying to earn his way back into her warmth. I smiled gently. I'm just learning how to listen to myself again. That sentence hit her like a quiet explosion. Her pupils shifted. Her breath caught. Do you think I've been bad for you? She asked, almost a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang between us, charged and uncomfortable. It was the first time I didn't rush to rescue her from it, Dot. She changed the subject, but she grew tense, distracted, nervous in a way I hadn't seen before, not weeping or dramatic controlled. Calculating. She started locking her phone. She took her journal with her everywhere. She deleted messages when I left the room. Her behavior, once so confident and composed, began to fray. I wasn't looking for proof anymore, but I found it anyway. One night, I got a call from her best friend, Jenna. She sounded shaken. "I know we're not close," Jenna said, "but I can't stay quiet anymore. You deserve to know. She's been lying to you about a lot of things." I asked her what she meant, and what she told me made everything fall into place like jagged puzzle pieces. She brags about it sometimes. How easily she can flip a conversation. How you worship her. She even said she made you apologize for something you didn't do just to see if you would. My throat went dry. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then she said quietly, "Because she's starting to do it to me too, and I think she's unraveling." I thanked her. Hung up, Dot. Then I sat in the dark, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, shaking. Dot, it was bigger than I thought. This wasn't just dysfunction. This was a pattern, a game, and I'd been the longest-running player. But now I had something I never had before. Dot, an exit, and a plan. Something shifted the moment I stopped trying to fix her. Dot, it wasn't immediate, and it didn't feel triumphant. It felt hollow. Like I was standing in the wreckage of a house I'd spent years trying to keep from burning, only to realize I'd never even held the matches. But clarity is its own kind of fuel. I didn't tell her I'd spoken to Jenna. I didn't mention the journal again. I knew that anything direct would trigger the cycle tears. Confusion, threats of self-harm, seductive apologies, promises of change. I'd lived inside that loop for so long I could recite it by heart. Dot, so I did something different. I got quiet, surgical. Every word I spoke was intentional, measured. I started logging everything: texts, audio notes, even her voice on calls. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I wasn't planning to expose her to the world. This was for me, for my sanity, for the part of me that still second-guessed every red flag. I was building a mirror, one she couldn't twist or fog up. Dr. Marks supported it. She said the real challenge wouldn't be proving her lies. It would be not reacting to them, not getting drawn back into the performance. So I practiced silence, observed. And sure enough, she began to unravel. It started with little things. She accused me of being emotionally distant, cold. "You used to be warm," she whispered one night in bed, running her fingers across my chest, searching for that old familiar vulnerability. I stayed still, didn't flinch, just said, "Maybe I was never warm. Maybe I was just scared." She blinked, pulled her hand back like I'd burned her. Then came the guilt traps. She mentioned her father for the first time in months, the man she said had hurt her, who I was never allowed to ask about. Now suddenly she needed to process it with me. She cried in the kitchen, said I was her anchor, said she didn't know who she was without me. But I stayed calm, present, kind. Detached. That was the real storm, because her power had never come from shouting or violence. It came from intimacy, the illusion of shared pain. The way she could make you feel like the only one who could save her, while slowly convincing you that you were also the one breaking her. And now that I wasn't engaging, her mask began to slip. One night, I came home from work, and she was already spiraling. Said she found lipstick on a mug in the sink. I told her gently that it was hers. She said she didn't wear that shade. I said I didn't either. She started to cry, then scream, then fall to her knees. "I know what you're doing," she said between sobs. You're trying to make me crazy. You want people to think I'm insane so you can look like the victim. I stood there, watching her collapse into a scene she couldn't quite control. Her tears didn't land the way they used to. They fell. Flat, heavy, like someone rehearsing a monologue in a play no one came to see. I bent down, touched her shoulder gently, and said, "I'm not trying to make you look like anything. I just finally stopped lying to myself." She looked up at me, eyes wide, mascara bleeding, and for the first time, I saw something break behind them, not fear, not the kind she used to manufacture, but real fear. The fear of a puppeteer who just realized the strings aren't connected anymore. She stopped crying, Dot. She went quiet. For 3 days after that, she didn't speak much. No accusations, no seductions, just silence. She spent hours in her room. I knew she was planning something. I could feel it in the air like the pressure before a storm out then. On the 4th day, I came home and found the apartment spotless. Candle lit, music playing. Her smiling in the kitchen, wearing that old red dress I once said made her look like a song I couldn't stop humming. "Dinner's ready," she said softly. "I made your favorite." I sat, ate, listened. She spoke in gentle tones, told me how much she missed us, how therapy was showing her things, how maybe we could start again. I watched her, carefully. She wasn't breaking down anymore. She was regrouping. Her words were familiar, too familiar. It was like listening to a cover of a song you once loved, same lyrics, different voice, all meaning stripped away. I finished my plate. Then stood. And said, "I'm leaving next week." She froze. Her eyes didn't widen. Her face didn't twitch. She just stared. I waited for her to speak. When she didn't, I added, "I already signed the lease." I didn't want to say anything until it was certain. Still silence, but I saw it. Not sorrow, not fear. Calculations. A flicker in her eyes as she scanned for the right angle, the right weapon, the right emotional lever. But I didn't give her space to use any of them. I kissed her forehead gently. And walked out of the room. That night, she didn't sleep in our bed, but I did. For the first time in years, I slept without guilt curled up beside me. Still, I knew it wasn't over, because someone like her doesn't let go quietly. And I had one more thing to uncover before I could truly be free. The week before I moved out was the longest of my life, not because of sadness, not even fear, but because I had to keep pretending to still be inside the story she was writing, pretending I couldn't see her watching me from behind doors, listening for cracks in my voice, for slips that might suggest where my mind had truly gone. She became sweet, doting, careful, but there was a tension in her kindness, like a held breath. Her hands lingered on my back longer than usual. She laughed too easily at things that weren't funny. She studied me between sips of wine, like she was waiting for a trigger to pull. She'd never looked more beautiful, and I'd never felt more nauseous. Her journal was now locked away in my desk drawer at work. I didn't want it in the house anymore, but I'd photographed every page, and I kept going back through them at night, cross-referencing them with my memories. Patterns emerged. Timelines overlapped in strange ways. Certain manipulations coincided with moments when I'd been distracted, too focused on work or happy, in ways she wasn't part of. It was as if any sign of autonomy or joy on my part triggered a need in her to pull me back down, to test my allegiance again. But one entry stood out, one that chilled me in a way the others hadn't. If he ever leaves, I'll have to make sure he doesn't take the narrative with him. I can't let him be the one people believe. That line haunted me, because it wasn't just about our relationship. It was about control, the story she told others about me, about us. And I started to realize just how far that story might have already spread. I called Jenna again. Did she ever talk to anyone else about me? Like, say things that didn't feel true to you? There was a pause. Then Jenna said, "You don't know, do you?" "No what?" "She told people you were emotionally abusive." The air left my lungs. She said you were cold, manipulative, that you gaslit her. She told her mom you once threatened to leave her in the middle of a panic attack just to teach her a lesson. I couldn't speak. She said she stayed with you out of compassion, Jenna continued, because she didn't want you to be alone. That's why her friends never really warmed up to you. They think she's a survivor. I sat down, suddenly dizzy. She's been painting this version of you for over a year, Jenna added, quietly. I think, maybe even longer. I hung up not long after, still polite, still composed, but inside, something broke. She hadn't just hurt me. She'd made sure I couldn't speak without looking like the villain. I understood then. Leaving wouldn't be enough. Not with the narrative she had already seeded in so many places. If I simply walked away, she'd reshape the aftermath to suit her. A new chapter in her saga of emotional wounds. So I started gathering. Not revenge. Receipts. I compiled texts where she twisted my words. Audio clips from phone calls. Messages she sent to friends that contradicted her stories. Even old voicemails where she apologized for things she'd later claim never happened. Dr. Marks helped me organize everything. Not to use publicly, but to protect myself. To reclaim a version of reality I could stand on when the next storm came. Because I knew it would, and I didn't have to wait long. 3 days before my move-out date, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, phone in hand, smiling faintly. She looked up. "Your boss called." My stomach sank. "He said you left something on your desk. I told him you'd stop by in the morning." I didn't answer. She tilted her head. "You trust me, right?" There it was, that edge. The bait. I nodded slowly. "Of course." She smiled wider. "Good, because I trust you too." I told him you're going through a lot, that you might need time off after the breakup. She hadn't used that word before. Breakup. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a warning. I went to the office early the next morning. My boss was polite, distant. Told me someone had left a voicemail about concerns regarding my emotional stability. Wouldn't say who, but the look in his eyes told me enough. She'd started the next phase of her plan. Smear first. Destroy credibility. Make herself the grieving victim before I could become the man who walked away with dignity. That night, I didn't confront her. I packed. Quietly, methodically. I scheduled movers for 2 days early. I left the apartment while she was out, just a note on the counter. "Please don't contact me. It's over. Take care of yourself." I shut off my phone. And for the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It was freedom. But the aftermath was coming, because I hadn't just left her. I had walked away with the truth. And some people will do anything to destroy what they can no longer control. The silence didn't last. 3 days after I left, I got the first message from her mother, of all people. "I'm sorry things ended this way. She's heartbroken. I hope you find peace." No rage, no blame, just vague compassion, steeped in subtle accusation. I didn't respond. Then the texts came from mutual friends, people I hadn't seen in months. "I heard you just ghosted her? After everything she's been through?" She said you isolated her, that you were cold and unpredictable. One even sent a quote from her. "He made me feel like I was crazy, then left me to deal with the damage." It was happening, just as I feared. She was rewriting the story in real time, and I could feel the walls of perception closing in around me. People weren't asking me what happened. They were telling me who I was. It was surreal, but more than that, it was violating. Like watching someone break into your house, rearrange your furniture, and convince the neighbors it was always their home. The old version of me would have panicked. I would have called her, tried to reason with her, tried to explain. I would have apologized again for leaving, for not warning her, for hurting her by surviving her. But I didn't, because I had something stronger now than guilt. Truth. And people underestimate how powerful quiet truth can be. I called Jenna one last time. Asked if she'd be willing to talk to Dr. Marks, not for therapy, but to document what she knew. Not just about me, but about her. The lies, the manipulation, the pattern of behavior across multiple relationships. To my surprise, Jenna agreed. I think people need to know who she is, she said. She hurt more than just you. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to ruin her. I just needed to protect myself from her version of me. With Dr. Mark's help, I wrote a statement. Didn't post it online. I didn't share it publicly. But I sent it quietly to the people who had reached out with accusations, to those who had drifted away, confused and half-informed. In it, I didn't insult her. I didn't name-call. I just told the story as it truly happened. I shared excerpts from her journal, blurred for privacy, but enough to show the patterns. I included a letter from Jenna, and I invited people to sit with the discomfort of realizing that not all abuse looks like screaming or bruises. Some abuse whispers, cries, smiles, and manipulates. Most didn't respond, but a few did. Apologies trickled in, some awkward, some sincere. Others stayed quiet. Maybe because they still believed her. Maybe because they didn't know what to believe. But I stopped needing their validation, because something strange began to happen inside me. I started to breathe deeper, think clearer. I could hear my own thoughts again without her voice interfering. I could walk into a room without scanning for emotional traps. One morning, I woke up and didn't feel the weight in my chest. And that felt like a miracle. I kept going to therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd ended up there in the first place. How a man raised with kindness and self-awareness could still be so easily manipulated. And I learned something that changed me forever. People who are groomed to be empathetic without boundaries are easy prey for those who weaponize pain. I wasn't weak. I was trained to abandon myself, to make others feel safe. And she had found the perfect canvas for her performance. But not anymore. Weeks passed, then months. No more messages. No confrontations. She had moved on to another city. Someone sighed. Started dating someone new. I hope he sees the signs faster than I did, but part of me doubts it. She's very good at the opening act. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. I just hope someday she sits with the wreckage she creates and feels it, not as something inflicted on her, but as something she chose. Because that's the real twist in all this. She wasn't just broken. She was in control. I'm no longer a character in her script. It's strange what you mourn when something ends. I didn't grieve her smile, or her laugh, or the way she used to tuck her feet under mine at night. I grieved who I was when I loved her. The version of myself that still believed love meant endurance. That pain was proof of depth, that to be needed was the same as being valued. That version of me is gone. I moved into a small apartment. Downtown sunlight pours through the windows in the morning, and I started buying real food again. I put plants on the windowsill, not to impress anyone, just because it feels good to keep something alive. There are still days I question my memory. Days when a smell or a phrase triggers a flashback, and I feel my chest tighten like I'm racing for impact. Trauma does that. It doesn't knock. It returns like a draft through an old window, cold and familiar. But I don't answer it the way I used to. I don't apologize to ghosts anymore. Instead, I write. I speak. I help other men quietly, in forums and messages, in conversations behind closed doors, who feel like I once did, ashamed of being hurt, afraid no one will believe them, unsure if they're allowed to call it abuse when there are no bruises. And every time I see one of them come back into their body, reclaim their voice, I feel a small piece of myself return too. Healing is slow, Dot. It doesn't look like a movie ending. There's no triumphant music or final confrontation where everything gets neatly resolved. Healing looks like making coffee without feeling watched, like laughing and realizing you weren't afraid of being misunderstood, like sleeping through the night and waking up without guilt as your alarm. I no longer need to be believed by everyone. I no longer need to convince the world she was. I believe myself now. That's what they steal, you know. People like her. Not just your peace, but your certainty, your voice. And the only way to get it back is to speak, even if your voice shakes, even if no one claps at the end. Because surviving isn't about being loud, Dot, it's about not being silent. Anymore, Dot, sometimes I think about the last page of her journal, Dot. It was blank, clean white page. Maybe she hadn't gotten that far yet. Maybe she was waiting to see what story I would write. Well, here it is. And it doesn't end with me asking for forgiveness. Dot, it ends with me finally forgiving myself. Dot asterisk. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Click the video on the screen, and I'll see you there.